So welcome to the final episode, can you believe it, of the fourth series of the Floorplan. Matt Webber's my name, Dr. Libby Sander. Hello to you.
Hello, Matt. I've been in Japan and you've been injuring yourself again. What have you done now?
I've torn half of the meniscus of the right knee.
Playing cricket?
Playing cricket, yeah.
More surgery?
Possibly. Yeah, probably. I'm not sure. What do you know about menisci?
Nothing.
I've learnt a bit. Do you want me to share?
Does it fit in with the theme of the podcast? Do our listeners want to know about this?
Yeah, there's a red zone and a red-white zone and a white zone, and some of it heals better than others, other bits, and sometimes it needs a bit of a stitch depending on where it is, and I think mine looks like it's going to be the stitchable variety, but we'll see. We'll see. I should have done something sports medical. I think I find it quite fascinating.
Maybe you're a frustrated sports medical doctor, Matt.
Possibly. I possibly am.
Well, that's not the same as what I've been doing in Japan.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
I did not injure myself.
So for those who aren't familiar, what is it that you do it's an annual event now, isn't it? Yeah.
We have a study tour to Japan for our MBA students where they get to go and visit some pretty amazing companies, get lectures behind the scenes from, this year we had the CEO of Yamaha, the CEO of eBay Japan, multiple senior managers in companies like Uniqlo, Fast Retailing, Panasonic, Google. We went to Google, went to lots of amazing companies and pretty interesting stuff. Went to JLL as well, who have one of my favourite offices in the world. And yeah, things are changing a lot in Japan.
Talk me through, or talk us through.
By 2040, they're going to lose 24% of their working age population.
A quarter?
Mm-hmm. Pretty terrifying.
Whiz.
So we've been hearing about this demographic cliff and the supply-demand talent issue for a while, but I think a lot of companies are still, to be honest, a bit in denial about it. And I spoke at an event here at Bond last night, and that became pretty clear. By 2030, 85 million is the talent shortage that we're looking at globally. And that's going to result in some pretty huge revenue, unrealised revenue as well. But
by unrealised revenue, you mean simply money in an economy?
Yeah, because there aren't enough people to do the work. We're going to be 85 million people short.
Tax take is down. All the stuff is down.
All of those things. But in Japan, it's particularly pronounced because of their ageing population kind of trend. And so we heard at JLL, for instance, that a lot of the J Corps, so the traditional Japanese corporations like your Panasonics and a lot you probably wouldn't have heard of, they are outsourcing a lot of things because they've lost a lot of staff who retired in the last few years, and there isn't the talent there to do it now, and people aren't interested. There isn't the expertise. So it's a potentially great opportunity for other companies coming in who have specialist expertise. But other things that are on the radar, there are data centers. So people are looking at more security of data centers based on kind of geopolitical events at the moment. So Japan's seen as being a very safe place, but electricity supply is a challenge in Japan. So you need a lot of electricity to run the data center. But, I could bore everyone for hours, but so many interesting things and things you may not have heard of, Matt. So a huge multinational in Japan called Ajinomoto, which you probably also haven't heard of. They're in food. But they also have another division, which I didn't know about till this year. So they produce substrate, which is like the interlayer insulation material for things like circuit boards, for semiconductors, very important, connection between silicon chips and the printed circuit boards. So when we're talking about quantum computing and those sort of things, it's just going to get more and more important. They have 97% of the global market.
Really? The leaders in substrate.
Yeah. So all these things that you think about. But if you look at supply chains, those are the kind of things that companies are going to be looking at going, that's a good thing. That's a stable, reliable, but a lot of turmoil obviously going on at the moment from the trade perspective and all of the things that are not things we chat about on the podcast, economics and things like that. But very interesting times. There's only 2% unemployment in Japan right now.
It's amazing, isn't it? The one thing that I find fascinating, I already touched on it, is that reduction in public revenue as a result of people falling out of a workplace. We take, well, for so long, it's been the bedrock of most economies in the world, that reliable source of government income. But all of a sudden, if people are too old or dying, then it doesn't really work. So how do you fix that? Oh, immigration? Japan and immigration? Yeah.
Well, they have very low.
Very low.
Very, very low rates.
And there's obviously always, like for instance, here in Australia, and the debate we hear in the States all the time is no more. No, we don't want to take any more immigrants. In fact, we want to cut back on our immigration policies and you know, grow our own sort of stuff. That's not probably going to work either. So
it's an interesting
It becomes
topic.
a conundrum. It's fascinating to me as the geopolitical sort of stuff.
Well, there was a recruitment agent last night at this event. She came up to me. So there were a lot of accountants at this event. She said, yeah, I'm recruiting accountants. And she said, it's not only the fact that when you get to interview with these people, they're asking things like, what's the flexibility policy? Will I have any work-life balance? You know, all the things we've been talking about. She said, I can't even get people to come to the interview. Young people aren't even interested in being accountants.
They just don't want to do it.
Don't want to do it.
No. I'll
Not
start my own
interested.
business.
So there's a lot of projections around AI for accounting, which hopefully might pan out to some extent,
well,
because they have huge talent
Well,
shortages. and have
tech's the other
for
spac
years.
filler, isn't it? If there aren't people, then, well, there's got to be technology to fill
But
the
really
void.
interesting. People saying, I don't want to do that. Not interested.
Go figure.
So
Good trip to Japan, though.
it was a great trip to Japan.
Did you find some stationery?
I did. I bought
Your
quite a
secret
bit.
vice. Your
I
secret
bought
vice.
My secret vice.
Yeah.
I bought quite a bit of stationery, so I have stocked up for the next year. A lot of things you can't buy in Australia, so I'm quite pleased with my stationery.
Kit bag. Libby's kit bag is full.
My
That's
stationery.
terrific.
Yes, but now I need perhaps what this Australian company has done, which is a 4-day work week in order to have time to use my stationery.
We keep coming back to it, don't we? The 4-day work week, and you know, those who thumb their noses and those who don't.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more widespread, so it's going to continue. So this company, it's an Australian media agency, which again, I think this is great because it's outside of the realm of like, oh, well, of course those companies can take 4-day weeks, but media, you're supposed to be on 24/7, aren't you? So they will still be on call on Friday for important cases. So that maybe undermines it a little bit, but he said it's about, you know, what people actually want. And their 4-day trial had exceeded expectations, so they decided to keep it permanently.
It's remarkable. And here in Australia, for those listening internationally, we've, of course, had our annual run of long weekends. There's,
Yes.
you know, Easter, the Labor Day holiday just gone, and Anzac Day. And sometimes if the stars align and the moon's in the right place, you get lots and lots of 4-day weeks, basically. How much better do you feel? Well, you've been overseas. How much better do I feel?
Yes, I was going to
For
say
that.
I was overseas on the tour for Easter and Anzac
Yes,
Day.
so there you go.
But I did have last Monday off, and that
absolutely
was nice.
loving it. I love this time of year. And Easter's my favourite holiday. So many people say that, and I wonder why they say that. Even my kids, school-aged kids, they're going, couldn't we do it in 4 days? Couldn't we do it? That's a schooling day. Couldn't we get it done
Yes,
in 4 days?
they
really?
could.
Some schools can. Some
They
schools
do.
do.
Yes.
And I've made the mistake of pointing that out to particularly my younger daughter, who's now agitating for that.
Well, having spoken about that, that's
Yes.
a lovely segue into the growing top 15, is it? Growing skills in Australia, or 20, 15?
15.
So let's have a look at these and see whether or not you think, A, you could do this, Matt, whether you need upskilling, or B, whether you were surprised. So at 15, we've got problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little surprised that was at the bottom of the list.
Yeah, I would have thought that'd be higher.
And then leadership.
So to the next one, I thought, well, that's where a lot of people complain about their existing vacuum. So to have that at 14th.
I was very surprised that 14 and 15 were leadership and problem solving, because every time I turn around, someone's telling me how terrible leadership is and the lack of leadership, especially when 13 is point of sale systems. Are you serious?
Nah, boring. Not into that. Lead generation, like generating sales. Boring. Sorry to offend those who are in these.
I was going to say, Matt, some people might really enjoy their sales job.
Boring to me.
Okay.
Statistical data analysis, I thought that'd be higher up too.
Yes, so that's only at number 11, beaten by 10 for budget management, which I guess, you know. But I mean, that's hardly a new skill, is it?
No, not really.
And an accountant said to me last night just how much their clients now are getting AI to do things for them and saving some of the things that they used to get the accountant to do.
For my injured knee, not to harp on it,
it's okay, mate.
but fascinating, I pumped my MRI images just for the experiment of it. I pumped my MRI images into ChatGPT just to see what it would tell me about myself. And it churned out a really comprehensive report of the kind that you would normally read from a radiologist. And it all made incredible sense, but it was so wrong. It was so. It told me that I had a complete rupture of my ACL and all these different things. So a bit of work to be done.
That's a bit scary. Note to listeners: don't feed your medical reports, and then you may give yourself a heart attack.
Don't go to Dr. Google. Similarly, don't go to Dr. ChatGPT. Where are we up to?
Number 9. Yep. No surprises. Conflict resolution.
Again, it would have been in my top 5.
Yes, and most people are terrible at this. They just avoid it and nothing happens. Oh, well, here's one that's going to bore me to tears. At number 8, regulatory compliance. Okay, great.
A bit of that in the tertiary sector.
No,
there's a little bit of that.
No, thank you. I don't want to learn about that. What's at 7, Matt?
Market analysis, which sort of comes into that data.
That's important.
Statistical data analysis point that I made earlier. I would have thought that'd be closer to the top as well.
Customer service management at number 6. Why is this a new skill?
I don't think it is. Well, it's sort of
they're saying these are becoming more important.
Yeah.
Adaptability at number 5. Yes, very important. Most people are not so good at that either. Then 4, no surprise, large language model proficiency.
Explain that though, because that doesn't mean you're good at Italian and French and Spanish all at once, does it?
No, it means that you are proficient in knowing how to write prompts and use those large language models like ChatGPT, etc. Are you good at number 3, Matt?
Not bad. I like to think I'm okay at strategic thinking. How about you? You're good at it.
Oh, that's something. I've done one of those Gallup Strengths Finders. We often do those with our students and organisations. So that is one of the top 5 for me, apparently.
There you go.
Other things not so much, but that one's good.
Communication at number 2 does and doesn't surprise me in the same breath, if it can, because I often hear of the demise of traditional media forms and all that kind of thing coming out of a media background, but there does exist a huge marketplace for squishing ideas into little digestible chunks and doing it clearly and effectively. So there it is at number 2.
I don't agree with the statement in the article though. Communication, it might be simple. I don't think it's that simple, is it?
It's not.
People who are good communicators aren't that?
It is not.
Aren't that common? And then number 1, AI literacy. I'm sounding bored by that. I mean, it's not boring, but
But what does it mean?
Well, according to the article, the hiring of AI talent has surged by more than 240% over the last 8 years as it accelerates workplace change, creates new jobs, transforms roles, and drives productivity. So how good are you at integrating AI into your business, to putting it into your workflow, to helping it augment the talent? We've talked about agentic Matt, all those sorts of things.
Okay. Well, there's your top 15.
But I know how much you love AI.
Yeah, I'm coming around a bit.
Not after your scan, it didn't help at all.
Well, no, but there's other elements that
are
making my life much easier.
Really?
Yeah.
Any that you want to share with
No.
listeners?
It's sort of taking the place of a whiteboard. It's like an idea generator.
Okay.
You know how you used to do diagrams, put a word up. What do they call it? Word maps.
Yes.
Word maps.
Mind maps.
Mind maps. I've always used them. That's me doodling when I'm looking for ideas, and I'll expand them out and extrapolate accordingly. And I'm sort of now seeing AI as a bit of an extension of that.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah, well, it has a place. has a place in Matt's life. People will be pleased to know. Now, to introduce our special guest this week, and I am very genuinely excited about this. It's kind of a nice one to end a series on because I think it'll have a very broad appeal. Now, there's any number of stunts that the Red Bull brand has lent its name to, but perhaps none have been so grand as the Stratos project. Now, the aim of the project was to support the first human to travel at Mach 1, or the speed of sound, without the assistance of an aircraft. And that human was Felix Baumgartner. And our guest today had a little bit to do with all of this, but to give you a bit of a taste of what it's all about.
I wanted to be the first human outside of an aircraft breaking the sound barrier. I almost weigh twice the weight that I normally have, and it's very difficult to do a perfect exit. Do not over-rotate, because if I start over-rotating, there's no air that you can use to slow down.
Okay, Joe, I'm ready.
Okay, here we go, Felix.
I'm going over.
First 25 seconds, it looked like everything's under control. And after 34 seconds, I hit Mach 1 and I broke the speed of sound.
Was that him breaking it?
Yeah. That was our goal. I wanted to be the first human outside of an aircraft breaking the sound barrier. Because of the fact that a lot of those scientists said prior to the jump, you're going to spin like crazy, and the other half said, we don't think anything is going to happen. I was mentally prepared to spin, but I was hoping that I'm not going to spin. Now, if you watch the next couple of seconds, you see at that moment, it slowly starts to spin. It's getting faster. The problem is there's no protocol. There's nobody in the world telling you, listen, Felix, if this happens, you have to do this while the whole world is watching. Then I was trying to move my arms around a little bit, just maybe it does something, and then it stopped for a second, but now it starts getting the opposite direction, and then it really ramps up. At that moment, it's not about breaking records anymore. At that moment, it's all about survival.
Speed 600 miles per hour.
There's only one way for the blood to leave your skull, and that's through all the eyeballs. If that happens, you're gonna die.
Speed 700.
In the end, it took him just 34 seconds, all that time and effort and money for 34 seconds. It's kind of mind-boggling, but it's also extraordinary, a hell of an achievement. 34 seconds to go supersonic. He reached a top speed. This is just a guy in a kind of spacesuit of 844 miles per hour as he hurtled towards Earth, 1,358 kilometres per hour. Look it up on the video. It's extraordinary. The whole Red Bull thing is extraordinary. And to today's guest.
Yes, Dr. Andy Walshe has been for a number of years the HighPerformance director at Red Bull, has his own organisation called the Liminal Collective that are all about hacking human potential. He's an Australian, fascinating guy. I think he said he used to spend, he's just stepped down from the Red Bull role, but about 200 and something days a year on a plane.
Gosh.
Which is a lot. But incredibly interesting guy to chat to. He's in all kinds of fields. I was talking to him about someone who's creating underwater houses to kind of test out, well, what would it be like to live on Mars? Because we don't actually know. And yeah, like a whole bunch of other things.
All this sort of testing the perimeters of human endeavour. It's fascinating how, a drink company has evolved into this space that sort of has at its core this kind of scientific fundamental, or these scientific fundamentals that are really teaching us a lot about ourselves. I mean, it's all very exciting, a lot of it. People jumping from plane to plane midair and all that kind of thing and doing whatever they do. But there's a science... There's lessons being learned from all of this about human potential and what can be done and why things can't be done.
Exactly. And he talks about organisations creativity is not going to happen. Innovation is not going to happen unless you're willing to try things and take a risk and make mistakes and fail.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies say, oh, we want to do that, but we're not actually willing to take the risk and we're not actually willing to fail.
Do you know, you always ask me after these interviews, you know, what was the thing that you take away from, what did you take away from today's conversation? And you've preempted it with me. The idea, well, he even poo-poos the idea of failing fast, which is a bit of a common, you know, buzz idea, you know, fail fast and then move on and don't fail next time. But he's like, almost like, take your time when you fail and extract as much juice out of the mistake as you can, because next time round you're going to be that much better as a result of the experience.
Exactly. Wallow in the failure, people.
Wallow in the failure. T-shirt. I think we could do a range of merch.
We could.
Wallow in the failure, the floor
Don't know
plan.
how popular that's going to be.
It's not going to really take off at all, is it? We'll leave the big ideas to Dr Andy Walshe, shall we?
Hi Andy, it's brilliant to have you here today on the Floorplan. A little bit of a different setting for us than what we usually have, recording in our podcast studio at home. We are in the beautiful Capita Springs offices of JLL in Singapore with an incredible view of Marina Bay Sands behind us. It's not a bad place, is it?
No, it's not bad. The view outside these windows is pretty spectacular. So yeah, very nice.
And you've done a lot of super interesting things, and I want to get into a fair bit of that today. But in terms of your background, it's been, again, pretty broad. You have an advisory role at the moment with JLL on creativity and high performance, but you've been in Google, the Australian Institute of Sport, the Australian Olympic Committee, Department of Defence, and probably I know one thing that the audience is going to be very keen to hear about, which is your role as High Performance Director at Red Bull. So lots to cover today. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how that has sort of shaped your thinking into this focus on high performance, creativity. We're going to get into the longevity as well.
Yeah, I think my sort of career, I was very fortunate. I graduated a human movement degree at Sydney University in the late 80s, and I got caught up in some of the Institute of Sport programming at the Canberra, the main office, and then also around the states and the different state institutes of sport. So really I was fascinated in human performance, how the best do what they do, how they learn, how they develop, when they make mistakes, how they recover, all those sorts of things around the science of performance. And then that sort of led me to programs in the US and Europe. And as you said, the Red Bull was probably the one that got the most attention over the years.
Can you talk a little bit about, I know I've heard you speak about skunk works and those types of programs if we're talking about innovation and how important they are in organisations. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe some examples of some skunk works programs that have created significant change, and even housing them in a different building and why that's so important?
Yeah, I think for me, when we were doing the Stratos project, I'd had spent about 3 years as an advisor to DARPA, which is sort of an advanced research arm of the Department of Defence in the US. And I'd seen the types of people, the types of projects they work on, and the high failure rate they expect there. There's a plaque on the wall that says, if you don't invent the internet, you get a B. So it's a pretty high standard. I was there as an advisor, so I was able to learn a lot there. And then when we're doing the Stratos project, which was the jump from space, people call it.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a bit more about that for our listeners who aren't familiar.
Yeah. So we did that at Red Bull, but we had to recruit, because we couldn't afford the latest and greatest talent. We had to recruit sort of the right stuff community that had worked on the Apollo and Mercury programs, and many of them had been at the original Skunk Works and Lockheed up in Lancaster. And fundamentally, you saw a very different mindset and approach to innovation. The flight test program is probably the easiest narrative, where you just try to hit these extraordinary goals, trying to do things that have never been done before.
Stealth bombers.
Everything. And you listen to the stories about how they went about it and the freedom of innovation they were allowed, the flexibility they had with respect to how they were measured, not against ROI, but in the quality of the ideas they brought forward, whether they succeeded or not. And the reality was they innovated at a rate which is sort of exponential, even in today's changes sort of styles. And what you saw in that model is there's a very unique type of personality that sort of lines up for that. There's a culture that's very specific to that. And the wonderful thing about it is we got to hear these stories of them pushing the limits of what's possible And we took a lot of notes. We managed to listen and learn and build a framework around which help sort of what you call regular organisations adopt some of those practices and put into place.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about how organisations might translate that when you said the quality of ideas, because what we know in most organisations is there is an adversity to risk-taking, even if we say there isn't, and there are metrics that perhaps don't support you just an individual generating a lot of ideas. So how might organisations start to make that cultural shift away from what are these very decades-old management practices now?
I think the biggest mistake organisations try to make is they try to shift the whole organisation, and that's not going to happen. Just too much inertia in the system. So what we say to them, first principles, is let's just distribute that risk. If you're going to take a part of the organisation that can really push the boundaries, doesn't have a formal ROI metric in place, quality of ideas, the way you approach the ideas, do you see them through to the end? That is reimbursed equally as much as ROIs in other parts of the organisations, and you can kind of pass that out.
Yeah.
So you're not taking everything and putting it on black in Vegas. You're taking a part of the organisation where you can identify the talent who's better suited to that mindset. People have a high tolerance for risk, high tolerance for failure. You can have a isolated part of the budgeting and the associated bureaucracy. So simple contracts, simple ways of moving quickly, getting rid of all the normal legal and all the other things that you have to deal with. And you want to speed that pace up. And I think organisations can choose then to how much of that do they want to bring in? Do they want to outsource it? Do they want to bring a little in? And I think most organisations feel like, that in the bigger corporations, you see a lot of M&A. They don't even take that risk internally. They just go out and find the companies doing that in the start when they buy and bring it in.
Yeah.
But then they can kill that idea. So I think there's a bit of both. You definitely want to look outside and see what's happening in the world, and if something's appropriate for your organisation, you probably get involved. And at the same time, bring a little bit of that culture inside the organisation to give that energy, and also the aspiration. One thing is really clear: when you run a moonshot internally, it has so much profound impact, both culturally, from a recruiting perspective, from an external perception that this organisation is doing edgy things, pushing the limits, internal talent, who internally is suited to that. And it also motivates people, and it gets a lot of cross-collaboration, because if you're all shooting for this extraordinary moonshot, you sort of break down a lot of the normal barriers to and the siloing. So there's lots of pros and cons to it, but that's the examples we tend to walk down for groups.
And the putting them in a different building, which as a researcher on workplace, I find fantastic. Yeah, talk us through why they did that.
Well, Skunkworks originally did that, and I think part of it was just to isolate. And Kelly Johnson, who was the founder of that program, he said, I want very small, isolated teams that I don't want to have to deal with all the day-to-day. In fact, the gentleman one of them in particular, I remember, who we worked with on Stratos, would say they would sneak out each night and steal computers, resources, things from other parts of the building and bring them back. And other parts of the building weren't allowed into their side of the shop. So they'd actually strip the rest of the workplace. And so it gave you an idea of that sort of cowboy mentality and what they were looking for. So I think that is sort of an extreme example. I think it's very hard in big corporations to create that idea right in the middle of central HQ. I don't know whether you necessarily need to pass it out, but you definitely need to culturally isolate it.
So moving on then, when you ended up at Red Bull, what was the original premise behind that? And talk us through some of the adventures, which I've heard a little bit about. Sound fantastic while you were there.
So we started, I'd been working very closely in the US across pro sports and the Olympic movement and in the military groups. And then Red Bull, a couple of the athletes we had in the US Winter Olympic program were also Red Bull athletes. And the sort of Red Bull's a marketing company, as you know, fundamentally. And they identified this idea that in a below-the-line marketing campaign, so where they're not allowed to physically advertise with an athlete holding the product, they only get recognition and broadcast space when the athlete or the talent wins or does something extraordinary. And then other people will highlight that story. So they said, if we can have our talent either win more or perform more or do things that have never been done before, and more people talk about it, we get the upside. So the fundamental mission of that job was, can you come in and help this community, which was about 1,000 athletes, give or take 170 sports at the time. There were several, in the culture programs, a couple of thousand artists, musicians, filmmakers. So they were thrown in the mix too, which was a great learning opportunity for me. And we just started to bring human performance practices in the classical sense, and then we got very innovative to service the community. And we started to build programming out that was supportive of the talent to do whatever they wanted to do. And that was a big breakthrough for us.
Were there core principles in those programs that you talk about supporting the talent to go and flourish at whatever they're doing, whether they're an artist or a rock climber or Formula One driver?
So, yeah, it was very easy because real world-class talent knows what they need to do. If you can get out of their way, so usually the conversation was just very casual. What is it that you need? What's missing? What are you trying to achieve? Now, we were obviously had a lot of experience in maybe shortcutting some of those pathways, but typically they recognised those key metrics or key factors they wanted to develop. So we developed what we call a performance model, where we would put that human or the team in the middle of the sort of model. We would look at all the levers we could pull to influence that talent in a positive way. And then we would use best-in-class behaviours from anywhere in the world if they picked an element of that model to reference against. So if they picked, if they're an athlete trying to work on creativity, so they want to reimagine the sport, they want to do things differently, they win, it's all about winning. We would maybe look at some athlete examples in the creative space, but we would go, well, who's really world-class? And we're lucky we're in Santa Monica. We were up the road to Hollywood, filmmakers, artists, and we would leverage their stories and their techniques for improving their creative process, and we just crossed them over. And vice versa. We would do that around all the different groups. And it sort of was a self-fulfilling prophecy. World-class talent listens to world-class talent. And so just connecting them in the end of the day. And we took a lot of notes. So we started to build a catalogue of tools and techniques and programs that could accelerate that. So it got us a little bit of a shortcut.
Creativity is not something we hear about as often paired with high-performance elite athletes, although it's obviously very much a part of that process. So I'm curious how we might define creativity from the sort of paradigm that you're sitting in, and then how that plays out for those athletes in terms of you encouraging that, because I imagine many of them may have come up through a mindset of drilling into, if you're a swimmer, right? If you're in the pool, doesn't seem to feel very creative. So talk us through that. What's creativity mean in this context and how that might be applied when they're not sure how it might help them?
Yeah, it's a great question. The fundamental premise you get your head around is creativity is about winning, about being ahead of the curve, if you like. So when you're talking to the athletes, the top talent in the world reimagines a sport. So the best athletes in the world, pick an easy example right now, they're playing in LA, the Lakers, LeBron is defining the game of basketball by his way of being and way he plays in such a way that the rest of the world now changes basketball. So you talk about it in sport, about a competitive advantage. If you're talking to the military, you're talking about problem solving. The special mission units, when they're landing on a particular role or job that they have to do, they have to solve problems very quickly. And the more they can outthink the competitor, in this case, whoever they may be up against, the more quickly they can adjust and execute on their plan. In the business space, you change it to innovation. They want to know about it, but it's always about winning. How do you see things that no one else is seeing? How do you see the competitive advantage in doing things more efficiently, more creatively? And how do you then apply that to give yourself a chance to do better and have a successful outcome? So the language changes depending on the group, but it's always the same thing. It always starts with this idea of what can we do in our world, the area of mastery we're focused on, to give us a chance to outperform everybody else. So you change the language, but once they hear that, there's a recognition in all the communities that we're all creative at the top of the game. It's just in the classical sense, I don't paint, I don't write music. It's not defined like that anymore.
Can you talk us through an example that springs to mind, maybe with one of the athletes, of how they started to apply that creativity and subsequent transitions, enhancements in terms of their performance, or redefining the sport, as you said, because I think that's really interesting.
There are so many examples. Think about it like this: any artistic sport, they're inventing new tricks, new ways of moving all the time. In the classic one that everybody can sort of resolve themselves to is the high jump. That's the classic one. It started with the straddle, then people realised the Fosbury flop, and they started to move from a way of jumping in success to different techniques to execute, all which improved the performance. So whether you just run up to the bar and hop over it, or whether you throw your body up and over so that your centre of gravity passes below the bar as you get higher, it was about winning. I think those examples, there's so many, because we had such diversity of talent at Red Bull, that it was, whether it was inventing a new way to the equipment, adjusting the equipment in a new way, taking things away. In big wave surfing, you saw the tow era emerge, and then people said, no, the tow era is sort of, we don't want those noisy machines, we'll go back to paddling, and then, well, what if we actually rose above the water? So then they got the foils on the board, so now they foil these big waves. So these experts are always pushing the boundaries of what's possible, and that's how you sort of, and you try and encourage that. Funnily enough, hardly any communities around the world train to it.
So talk to us about that, because I think that's a very key point, and a lot of people in organisations or in sport might be sitting there thinking, hey, I don't get taught this bit. I don't feel like I'm a creative person.
Yeah.
What do I do about that?
For the people who really don't see themselves as creative, you got to throw that away. You got to just throw that parrot. Everybody's creative. Now, you may invent a new way of driving to work. You may invent a new way of flipping pancakes. It doesn't really matter. It's the idea that, okay, if I'm trying to think of a different way of doing things, I'm in a creative process. Now, how do I encourage it and accelerate it? I found the easiest way is to define a sort of simple process, and it starts with the Imagineering. Get yourself outside of the normal world. Get yourself out of your silo, out of your day-to-day. Talk to other people, talk to other performers in this particular case, see how they're doing things, and you'll naturally start to pick up ideas, and that in itself is the creative process. In the business side, again, it's that balance between creativity for creativity's sake and then in an innovation that actually makes money. And the hard part is you constrain thinking very quickly if you say all your innovations have to make money, because suddenly you'll go safe. And I think that's the biggest characteristic we trade, is the ability to have the courage to do things that could result in an abject failure and continue to build on those learnings, even though you may fail 30, 40, 50, 100 times. And I'd say the fundamental things most groups get wrong is they don't train people how to fail. They say fail fast, fail quickly, but they don't actually give people an experience whereby they can feel the visceral and the emotionally challenging experience of actually putting yourself out there and having the whole thing fall apart because it feels horrible, and training through it. And we train that. We literally train that space.
And how do we do that, Andy? I think that's a very interesting and important point.
The easiest way for us is to use what we call obtuse training. So if you're really good at broadcasting and hosting and you're very comfortable in this space, we learned very early that it's hard to take very top talent and challenge them in a space that they're very comfortable, because they've developed all the tools, the hides, the tells, they know exactly how to navigate it. So taking you in this space and challenging you to a point where you can learn could be difficult or take a lot of time. If I take you out and put you on a 50-foot wave, you'll suddenly be like, you'll be back in that beginner's mindset. You'll have a chance to fail quickly. So
Possibly drowning.
Okay. So, but point being, people get very good in their native environments where they've been learned and trained and have a history of performance. So to practice what it feels like to be back in that beginner seat, we put them in a beginner seat in obtuse environments. So public speaking is a classic one. Most athletes don't feel comfortable in that space for the most part, or struggle with it. When we do it, we partner with groups like Cirque du Soleil, and you get you on stage, you're doing improv. It's a very challenging environment that allows us to create that sort of sense of fear and threat without putting them in harm's way. So the reality is we have breath hold programs, we have artistic programs, we have physically challenging programs if you're not physically inclined. And then we just put you in those environments. The most important part is there's always some very rigorous, what you'd probably call behavioural psychology training lets you have the experience and post we unpack it. So we're not just throwing you out there for the sake of it. So yeah, it's done that. Done in a very controlled and organised manner, and we just progress it. We make the challenge easy, moderate, hard, extraordinary hard, crazy hard. And we just keep walking up and down that line until you feel comfortable.
So if I'm an employee, someone starting a business, maybe someone who is training themselves as an athlete, I don't necessarily have the resources yet. I'm not in an organisation that's cool enough to be doing this. What are some simple things that I could do as an individual to replicate these kind of processes you're talking about so that I can learn faster, get more uncomfortable, become more creative?
I'd love to say you can do it with a PowerPoint, but you can't. You literally have to feel and experience as being out there. You need the education. So what's happening? You're engaging, as you know, the flight or fight process, which is inherent to all of us and dates back to our evolutionary beginnings. So what I say to people is, where are times where you feel yourself getting in a state where, in the first instance, you're reacting, not responding? So there's a simple mindset shift of threat versus challenge. So in any environment, we tell people, even if it's just day-to-day, dealing with the kids, how do you change it from a threat mindset to a challenge mindset, which is simply going, oh my God, I'm going to fail, I'm going to make a mistake, losing my temper, to what can I learn from this experience? So we teach you very first, no matter what the scenario you're in, where you feel that little bit of anxiety and tension build up, flip to that challenge. Okay, what can I learn? For most people, it's not going to kill them. It's going to feel uncomfortable. And in that process, can you watch and observe your behaviors? And if you can start to recognize when that's happening, so you start to get a little heart rate, a little breathing, a little sweaty palms, can you get ahead of that a little bit? So if you can shift from that mindset, very quickly you start to go, what can I learn from this? What can I possibly improve about myself and how I reacted to that situation? So that's fundamentally the sort of first step. And then we say practice it a lot. In the traffic, when you get home and you're tired and frustrated, when you're at work and someone objects to your wonderful presentation, so sit back and go, really, okay, how can I respond to this in the appropriate way versus just reacting randomly?
I love that. And is it graduated, Andy? Would you recommend that? Because I'm thinking you talk about public speaking, and I think that's an example that, I don't know if it's number 2 for you or 1, is it?
Number 1 in the US.
Number 1 in the US, right? So if people think, okay, I go out, I try this, I join Toastmasters or something like that, I get up on the stage, I go completely red in the face, I freeze, I can't remember a single thing I'm going to say, I feel humiliated, kind of rush off the stage, and just the thought of even trying that again makes that person absolutely petrified. So should we be jumping that far off the cliff, or what happens if something like that happens and people just think, oh, this is terrible?
There's always about progression. If you throw people in the deep end, quote unquote, that experience will be horrible, and they won't learn. They'll be so overwhelmed. So it might be, so if we do the sort of the Cirque program we have, we get you up there, and the first time you have a mask, just like Cirque, and the mask, we may have you fill it out, colour it in, whatever it is, but it gives you something to hide behind. And we may have a couple of people up together, and then we pull one away and we pull one. So there's always progressions in this development to the point where we're up there. And then if we get into something as advanced as improv, we'll put 2 improv actors up there with you. So no matter how badly you do, and you will do badly, they'll carry it. And you'll start to get comfortable. So we're always about supporting. I mean, people look at all the crazy training we do and think, they default to what we call a selection event. You're trying to are people worthy? And it's the reverse. It's everybody's worthy. It's our job to get them through. So if we put too much pressure on the situation, they'll default to that overwhelming and flight response. So if we can get them to shift from a threat to a challenge mindset, we then want them to take a moment to breathe, which is the best cue to relax yourself, and then go from assumption to assessment. So back to the boardroom. You're there, you work on this big presentation, C-suite's all in there, and you start blazing away on your presentation, and someone puts up their hand. What's the assumption?
They're going to tell me to shut up. This is a terrible idea.
Or they may be, I need to go to the bar. Literally, but people assume worst case scenario, and that goes back to our evolutionary model. Walking through the savannah, you hear a rustle in the grass.
as a tiger?
It's probably safer to assume something's going to get me than so we're trying to break that mold. So these scenarios, once you've got, all right, shift your mindset, all right, get to take a moment, bring in the relative cues, don't let the emotion get ahead of you. So on stage, I can't die. People here are actually supportive. Everybody in the audience wants you to do well. And if we navigate the progression well, you can move from assumption, which is always going to be negative, kept us alive, but now I assess. Okay, what's happening? All right, I'm here. People want me to succeed. Off we go. And then if you can do both of those, then you can make a decision usually that you want to respond in an appropriate way versus reacting. No one gets it right all the time. We can turn the heat up enough on anyone to get right over to reaction. The trick is starting to learn how you navigate that sort of spectrum. And if you find yourself getting a little overwhelmed, pull yourself back, watch that trigger, observe deep breathing, slow everything down, heart rate, respiration rate, have another go. And that's as simple as it sounds, is the fundamental process we follow. And then at the end of the day, we just say, be kind to yourself, no matter what. No one gets it right all the time. Our high stakes, highest performing people in the world, they will buckle under a certain situation, just like you and I will buckle under another situation. So the trick is to try as many as you can. And as you say, if you don't have a lot of resources, figure out places where you even recognize yourself doing it and practice. It just takes training. That's what people go, I should be able to do this. It takes years and years of training to do it on the biggest stages in the world.
Yeah, I love that you talk about being kind to yourself, because I think generally we're getting worse and worse at that in organisations and in society in general, and maybe not very kind to each other. And I'm thinking about this for employees, the deeper they get into their career and their expertise, but obviously also athletes, when you're used to refining, deepening that expertise, deepening that practice, it doesn't feel great, as you said, to go back to that beginner's mindset, even though we all know we should do that. I'd much rather keep refining in the space that I'm already comfortable and competent.
Good.
Does that tip people into those spaces of kind of lower self-esteem, that where you felt really competent at something for a while? So you go and try it and you think, I'm absolutely hopeless, maybe I'm not naturally gifted at this, I'm just going to give up. What advice did you give to, or do you give to athletes and employees to stop that? Yeah, it can be like a spiral of I just feel so untethered here that I think I'm going to give up.
Well, I think you're speaking to so much there, but I think one of the big things today is there's so much uncertainty in the system. And again, in uncertainty, the grass analogy in the savannah, you'll default to worst case scenario. So given the global socio-economic challenges, political issues, climate, the news is filled every day with bad news and uncertainty. So I think people are coming in already pretty ramped. That's what we would say. You're ramped. So just getting back to center, back to basics, so a couple of days off, a walk in the woods, the natural environment, getting yourself focused and centered again so you don't feel completely overwhelmed. And that's why it's fun to try and train in areas that aren't related to where you've got all your ego and your time and energy invested. Because if I have you fail up on stage in improv as a business leader, well, it doesn't really affect how well you're running the company or leading the company. So you get a chance to play, and we make the environment fun in that way so that people don't crush their ego. We do ultimately bring the worlds together, again, progressive, but we don't, so your point earlier, we don't try to throw you in that space because it can be damaging in the long run. It can literally crush people. And crushing people is not what we're about. We want them to perform in big environments, big stages, in front of their peers at the highest level. But we also know that we've got to get them there in a sort of graduated process versus good luck.
Is there a mindset thread you see between, obviously, these different contexts you've been in, defence, you look at your athletes, and then the highest performing employees? Is there qualities in terms of mindset or ways of thinking that you've noticed that people listening to this might think that's something I could adopt? Is there a similarity in terms of how they see the world, how they see themselves?
The probably most common thing that we look for is this sort of high level of self-awareness. You know where your strengths are, you know equally as clearly where your weaknesses are, and you adopt this idea of, all right, how do I bring the best of that, good and bad in some cases, to the problem I'm facing or the work I'm doing, and then how do I sharpen the pieces that I want to improve upon? And I think that's sort of wanting to leave no stone unturned with the best performance, trying everything, not being completely beaten down by making mistakes, actually using them as, all right, check that off my list, try something else. So that curiosity, so it's a combination of, I'm very self-aware. I understand my own personal triggers. I also understand how I show up in a team and what I bring and what I can't bring. And I think there's a lot of that that's in the equation. And then that curiosity. And then ultimately, when you get to the higher levels of sort of really pushing the edge, there's always a fundamental thread of, I'm doing it for a purpose bigger than myself, typically. In sport, in the military, it can be your family, your friends, could be, at some level it could be the nation, could be doing things for service to others, and even some people anchor in on their religion. We call it spirituality because we want to broaden that narrative, but the reality is, if there's something there that grounds you when it all goes to hell, and you can lean on that, it's an important part of the development I think people don't pay enough attention to. And then all of that is in community. You need to have community around you to do this. It's very rare to see people doing it in isolation. Now, you do have cases, but one good friend who you can confide in, rely on, who has your back, that will make the world a difference to your performance. And so we're always juggling all those levers. We're trying to figure out where's the opportunity.
I want to switch tack a little bit here to AI. You're sort of peering over the fence in some pretty cool, very edgy communities about what's happening and the developments that are coming down the pipe. What are your thoughts on, or examples you're seeing with athletes or other high performers, of how they're using AI to augment things like cognition and performance?
Well, it's moving so quickly, I have to change this answer literally every 24 hours, it seems, nowadays. But I think the first thing we're seeing is the real high performers are deep in the adoption. So they're not worried about where it's going or what's happening. They're just in it, using it. So I think for us, in the performance world, there's this idea that we don't even know how it's going to apply in many cases yet, but get comfortable in the space of what we call human-machine teaming. So engaging with another human is challenging enough. Engaging with a human and then maybe a machine or an agent is more complex. So we just say get used to that environment of developing trust to machines. In terms of improving performance, the way we try to encourage it is, can you use the machine to do the things it's really good at? Things that are highly automated, don't require a lot of ethical or moral judgment, creativity, and use that to write your annual reports, do your team analysis of the other team, ingest all the data, look for patterns in the data, all the stuff that humans take a normally long time to do. And then flip that. What does that leave us with? And I love to use a quote, and Ray Charles said it. He was being asked about his creative process, and he was talking about the piano, and he said the piano is capable of anything. A piano sitting down there can do anything possible. The trick is you have to imagine what to do with it. And so for our top talent, we use the same analogy. The machine can do anything. And pretty much now, give or take, depending which model you have, it's smarter than you are, it sees better, hears better, does a whole lot of stuff. Now, just take away some of the challenges. So the challenge for any of our performers is, how do they sit in front of it, and what do they bring to the equation? Can they actually imagineer the problem they want solved? It'll solve any problem. You've got to now challenge yourself. So we're back to the creativity conversation. So we're using it a lot for very simple things like red teaming. You've come up with a plan, a strategy, an approach, have the machine pull it apart, find your holes before the competition does. We use it in terms of coaching. What are you seeing in, say, uploading videos and things of technique? What are you seeing in the technique? So there's lots of things it's good for, but the trick is to become as creative as possible, to have it solve problems that no one else is solving, so that you get that competitive advantage.
I love that. You talk a lot about Imagineering as one of the key processes that you use. Talk us through what that looks like for you when you're working with an individual or a team and how others can adopt this.
We work back from the sort of, and again, living near Hollywood, it struck me when I was given all the artistic programs at Red Bull, how they navigate that space of coming up with something that's never been done before, pouring their soul and their heart into their art or their work, and how they bring it to life. And so with any individuals now, first and foremost, everybody's creative. Second, you can train it. Now, you may not become Picasso, but you're definitely going to be able to train it. So let's put that to bed. Now, how do we get you exposed to communities or tools or places or anything that is different and outside? And we call sort of widening the blinkers, widening the aperture, and exposing you, especially if you're talented, to as many different sort of adjacent, what we call performance adjacent elements that we can, whether it's arts, music, science, research labs, facilities, and then you start to see these people broaden that horizon. So that starts to break down the traditional silos. That's the first step. And then there's a whole bunch more steps, but the reality is that's the most important part, and it takes time and energy. Lots of organisations bring speakers in to showcase different parts of the world, but you've got to get really, really edgy in that speaker program. And I always say it's way better to get them out of the building and go and visit. So we do a lot of site visits, really unique organisations, just sit and listen and observe and sort of watch what they're doing, how they're doing it.
Like the idea of the immersive safari as a learning experience and that interdisciplinarity, absolutely.
Yeah.
And multidisciplinary thinking. And if we go back to the Enlightenment when art and science weren't separated, look at what flourished in that period. And I think it's so important for this shift in their thinking. And I think that's where a lot of organisations get stuck. We're going to do that very linear, very logical, the way we've always done it, instead of, as you said, opening the aperture is a great way to think about that.
And I also say you've got to do something. Once you've had it, it's great. I've seen all the world and it's amazing. Pick a project and pick something that's challenging, because the action will inform the behaviour. So people wait to come up with a plan to make sure I execute. No, just start. Start and try something new, try something different, and have that space in the organisation where you can do that. Because 9 times out of 10, you may not even solve the problem you're out to solve, but you'll come and discover these sort of unintended consequences of the program you're on. And that, once it's spinning, becomes a real source of ideation, innovation in an organisation.
And that self-efficacy as well. I can believe I can do this.
Yeah.
You're also looking over the fence of some pretty cool projects designed for things we're trying to do in the future from an innovation perspective. So going to space, longevity, all kinds of things. We were chatting off camera before about under the sea one. Can you tell us a bit about that? How that's a great example of this type of thinking and skunk works and experimentation with a different outcome that we can't prototype in real time.
Yeah. So one of our advisors, Kurt Cruck, he actually helped us. He developed our surf survival program, which morphed into one of our more powerful combinations of breath hold in a constrained environment that allows, and we put a lot of executives through that program, because you're coming up against a real threat, the fear of drowning, running out of air, and you have to navigate that curve of threat back and forth, but you can measure it. So he helped us build that program, which has become fundamental to most of the training we do. He's now embarked as, I think he's chief of performance now for a group called Deep out of the UK, where they're looking at underwater habitats down 100, 200 feet, these enclosed living spaces that they're starting to, they're building them right now, and they're deploying them around the world. There's obviously a tourism element to it, but it's a perfect example of doing something in the sort of moonshot bucket, never been done before. They're starting to see opportunities emerge that they had no idea about. The obvious ones they originally started with was research. I think he speaks about 5% of the oceans being charted, navigated, and understood. And that's only down to about 20 or 30 feet for the most part. So you get down to a couple of hundred, you're into a whole new ecosystem. And they're already seeing hundreds of new species of plant, animal life, things like that they're starting to then look to from a everything from pharma to treatments and other opportunities. But at the same time, then they realise the problem they also have to solve is how do you get people living in a box to get on? Flash over to the space program. Obviously, NASA's looking at long, deep space travel. Elon's off to Mars. That whole process where you're stuffing people in a very confined space for a year or so. So the reality is they're also starting to have to navigate a lot of psychobehavioural stuff that they're looking for. They're having to develop new materials, on and on and on and on. So that one problem which sounds very simple up front, of living underwater, has escalated into hundreds of problems that need to be solved. Each one of those problems is an opportunity, and they're right in the middle of it right now. They're going to start to deploy. Again, they'll have the tourism version, and then they'll have the research version. And I think that's what I love about being parts of these programs. It's the boldness, it's the challenge, it's the idea of doing stuff that's not been done before, which forces you into a space where you have to create and innovate and challenge yourself. And it's fun, and it's super fun.
And tied into that then with the long-term space travel or longevity, you were talking about human hibernation and some experiments going on there. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so as you get into the fringes of that, when you start to think about sort of deep stasis, like hibernation, like a bear or an animal like that, there's groups of researchers now looking at what are the mechanisms of inducing that in humans. So again, another offshoot of, well, if we can't get on, I think one of the early programs at NASA, they talked about why don't we send a married couple to Mars? And that was like, that's not going to probably work. The reality is people struggle in those confined environments. We don't even know the sort of pressures they're under day to day, just living. If your toilet breaks down, you're dead. There's so much that can go wrong. So maybe it's better not try to get on and just sleep or put in some form of stasis and hibernation. It sounds very science fiction-y, but there's a deep research process around it. And again, fundamentally looking at cellular regeneration under sleep and all those sorts of things that we know occur, how do they modify that? So again, it's a whole arm of research that's emerging out of these questions, sort of back to how do you get humans to stay together for a long period of time. So it's fascinating stuff.
Really interesting. If we think about organisations, we've talked about how everyone is creative fundamentally and how they can become creative, and some really great practical advice there. I am thinking about an experiment that a colleague was talking to us about, again, off camera this morning, about chickens. And they had this idea showed in this study that, the high-performing chickens, right? So all you want is high-performing chickens, the ones that lay the most eggs, the most productive chickens. So they just got rid of all the other chickens and put all the high-performing ones together. But apparently it didn't go so well. The chickens all got very aggressive and pecked each other to death. Hopefully that doesn't happen in our organisations. But if we do think about organisations, one, is it realistic do we only want all high performers, which some CEOs would say, yes, definitely the whole organisation to be high performing. And then what does that mean, though, the different levels of what does high performance mean for person A versus person B? And if we do end up with a whole group of LeBrons, right, they're all just going to peck each other to death, and that won't work at all.
So we have a saying in our world, talent's a curse. And there's many reasons for that saying. But one of the challenges we see is people say, I want a really high level of performance. I want a team of high performers. And they don't know how to manage or lead a high performing team. So already the training required to lead a team of highly creative, high performing, very aggressive in many cases individuals, that's how they got so good at what they do, is inherently full of problems themselves. And most of those programs don't work. And you can have high performers across the organisation, but super talents, usually there's a way, they're very, very, very good at one thing or those couple of things, but they've lost a lot of the others. So you're trying to build a whole team around them to enable them to do what they do so well. So I think it's a bit of they throw the word high performance. I want everyone to be high performance. I think they want everyone to reach a potential. But to have those hyper performers in one space just typically is not conducive to a really good working environment. And it's hard. It's hard to lead a team of rock stars. And so what you then do is say, all right, how do we bring and make everyone on the team a rock star? So we might have someone who leads the way with some capability, but someone else can bring the empathy and compassion in. Someone else can bring the creativity in. Someone else can bring the ethics and moral values into the conversation. And so we tend to see those who we call the Star Wars bar as a far more effective team. And individually, they may not all be best in the world, but together they bring that sort of, sum is more than, it's total more than the sum of the parts sort of conversation. And I think that's the way to approach it, is what can I do to bring every member on that team to the level they possibly can? Again, but as we spoke about, you've got to train it. It just doesn't happen. You just go, all right, everyone together, all right, off we go.
Which is unfortunately what happens sort of far too often. We're sitting in a beautiful space today, and then obviously all of these teams are operating in some sort of space, whether it be a space station or an organisation. What are you seeing from the work you're doing that might be influencing our built environments as we go forward?
I think back to the AI conversation, where we call it the human-machine paradox, where the technology is ramping at such a rate with such sort of seemingly infinite possibilities and capabilities. What does that leave for the human? Well, it's empathy, compassion, courage, virtue, ethics, hope, justice, temperance, intuition, whatever those classical virtues you'd like to name. So I think in the work environment, the ability of the machine or the AI agent or whatever you want to call it to do the heavy lifting and all the mundane work is now informing us in our highest performing organisations to free up people to become more human. So the human-machine paradox is even with the technology racing off at an exponential rate, the human is left to become more human now. And that's the skill set the machine can't replicate, well, at least at this point in time. So for the work environment, I think it's focusing on, go figure, trust, communication, leadership, how to build your intuition, how to build your sense of creativity, how to develop imagineering, how to follow and lead. All those things are, classically what you want a human interface to have. And I think bringing that in line is what we're seeing outside of the corporate space. I think it's naturally going to happen internally.
So Andy, just to wrap up, tell us a bit about what you've got coming up. What are the projects that you're most excited about?
What are we most excited about? We're working through a program on what we call a human digital twin. The easy version of that is, if you think of digital twins in the classic aerospace sense, you create a digital representation of, say, the engine of the plane you flew in on, and you can run that simulation of that engine on a computer and test it. You can run it for thousands of hours. You can test different things, different shapes, different configurations. And it's been very powerful in cities and construction and obviously engineering. We're now at a point, we're getting very close with the fidelity of our assessments, our ability to measure on humans, creating a human version of that. So the simple way to think about that is I can now take the training that I'm thinking of doing to win a gold medal, and I can run it on the simulation, so I don't have to do any of it. And I can run multiple simulations of that training. Eat more broccoli, eat less broccoli, run 10 miles, run 15 miles, and see which is most optimized. And then once I optimize the training on the digital platform, I can then execute it. So I think for us, that digital twin program across multiple institutions right now, but we're hyper-focused on the cognitive digital twin, is the one that's probably got the most upside from one, it'll help us understand humans in a way we've never understood them before, which will be staggering. I think from a everyday health and wellness, curing diseases, things like that, it's going to have profound impact on society in general. So it's a fun one because it has obviously an elite element to it where we can really push the boundaries of what's possible. But I think the betterment of society through the result of the learnings we get from it it'll be a health application here very, very quickly.
Can't wait to follow that. Really looking forward to seeing where that progresses and ends up.
Yeah, I mean, well, you'd like to actually have it do the training as well, and then you just sit back, but it doesn't work that way. It'll do the digital, you'll still have to, it'll tell you got to eat a lot of broccoli. If you don't like broccoli, you still got to, you got to get, so you still need a coach in the equation.
No one wants their digital twin to win the gold medal.
No.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today, and it's been brilliant to talk to you.
Very welcome.
What a thrill to chat to Dr. Andy Walshe.
It was really, really interesting. I actually did the interview when I was in Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
He was over there doing something in Singapore. Not exactly
Talking to you.
Talking to me.
That's what you say. No, we flew in. We flew in to meet in Singapore. It was halfway.
So, all right, Matt, the listeners want to know, are you going to jump between planes or attempt to ride a motorcycle up and down the fake Arc de Triomphe?
I can't do heights, so it couldn't be that. And I don't particularly like underwater scenarios.
And the jumping out of space thing? No. Okay.
No, I'll leave it to others and learn from the lessons.
You're going to be one of the ones. They have a great series every year that comes out about, Red Bull makes some films about people doing really cool, interesting stuff, not necessarily jumping out of planes, but all kinds of things, hacking human potential. So you're going to be one of those people that just enjoys living vicariously from their armchair.
It sounds pretty good to me.
Well, given the state of your injuries at the moment, Matt, and your physical condition, I'm not sure that you're really quite at that state. What about climbing Mount Everest? It's Mount Everest climbing season has officially commenced. So, no heights. So not Mount Everest.
I've been to Nepal and did the Annapurna circuit and whatnot a while ago. It was awesome. It was still my favourite overseas adventure, that one.
Lovely.
Being too close to the edge, it makes me go a bit funny. I'll be pretty much healed by the time we reunite for a fifth series.
Yes, we'll be back at the end of June, beginning of July. We're having our winter hiatus on the Gold Coast. Any winter plans, Matt, or you just need to heal your leg?
Just general hibernation.
Hibernation?
Yes, I'll just go into my little cave. And
what do you do when you go into your cave?
No, there's no hibernating.
No, I was going to say, this is news to me. No hobbies. But does this mean you can't play cricket for the winter season?
Yeah, it looks like my season is done before it even started.
So you might need some counselling. I thought you seemed a little bit sad today.
Yeah.
Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm okay.
How long? Does this mean you're going to miss the whole season if you have to have surgery?
Yeah, probably. But I'm trying to stay optimistic about it.
But we heard how much of an effect positively this had on your mental health last year.
Yes.
So we need something else to...
Guitar. I'll just indulge in guitar-based activities over the course of winter.
That sounds lovely.
That'll do.
I'm just going to...
That sounds lovely.
Play with my station. Well, I don't know. I've never heard you play the guitar. It may not be.
Well...
But you've been playing for a while.
I've been playing a while, so hopefully it'll be okay.
Well, I'm just going to do things with stationery.
So I'll be... next time we record an episode, I'll be preparing for a pre-season for summer cricket.
Should we... I might ask the listeners this. Should we ask Matt to play us something on our first episode of season 5?
It's something I learned during my hibernation.
On the guitar?
Yeah. There you go. Okay, I'll do that.
Amazing.
If people want me to.
Well, because this year so far we've had no musical.
No,
so you haven't been performing. So I think the guitar would be great. And we've got some really exciting guests coming up in season 5, including the famous Stanford economist Nick Bloom, who is one of the world's probably leading authorities on the effects of different locations for work. So super excited to have him coming on, and a whole lot of other very interesting guests as well.
Things in the pipeline. In the pipeline. Irons in the fire, so to speak. Enjoy your winter.
And you too, Matt.
You've been listening to The Floorplan, a Bond University podcast hosted by Dr. Libby Sander and Matt Webber. For more Bond audio and podcast content, search for Bond University on Spotify.